I still remember the sound that shouldn't have been there. It was a child's laughter, soft, echoing through the empty halls of my newly bought mountain house. I froze halfway through the living room, holding a box of tools, thinking maybe it was a bird or a trick of wind. But then a woman's voice shouted, "Dinner's ready," from upstairs. My dinner. In my house. I'd driven 7 hours, signed every paper, transferred every dime of my savings to buy this place. And somehow, a full family was already living in it like it was Sunday night in suburbia. When I stepped into the hallway, the air smelled of roast chicken and pine-scented cleaner. A kid ran past me holding a toy truck, stopped mid-stride, and yelled, "Mom, there's a man in the house." Within seconds, a tall man appeared on the landing, red-faced and holding a baseball bat. "Who the hell are you?" he shouted. I laughed awkwardly, thinking this must be some bizarre mix-up. "I could ask you the same thing," I said, raising my folder with the house deed. "I just bought this place." The man barked a laugh, like I'd told a bad joke. "You bought our home? We've lived here for 10 years. The woman came downstairs holding a baby, her eyes sharp enough to cut glass. "He's lying, Mark," she said. "This is another one of those scammers." Scammer. That word hit me harder than the drive up the mountain. Within minutes, the living room had turned into a courtroom. I showed my documents. They showed a framed family photo by the fireplace. They claimed their grandfather had built this house. I claimed I had bank records and a realtor receipt. And still, none of it mattered, because the sheriff who showed up an hour later looked more confused than either of us. He checked IDs, called dispatch, and finally scratched his head. "Look," he said, "you both have paperwork that looks official. But I can't kick anyone out tonight. Civil dispute. You'll have to handle it in court." That was how my mountain home dream turned into a hostage situation with polite small-talk boundaries. We ended up sleeping under the same roof that night, me in a sleeping bag near the tools, them in their bedrooms upstairs. The next morning, I tried to keep it civil. Made coffee, offered some. The man, Mark, just stared at me like I was trespassing in his life. His wife avoided eye contact. The kids whispered every time I moved. I went outside to inspect the property, half hoping to find a hidden sign saying, "Candid Camera." Instead, I found my mailbox stuffed with letters addressed to the Garrison family. The date on one envelope was from last week. That meant someone had been getting mail here even after I'd closed the deal. When I called the realtor, her number went straight to voicemail. By evening, I got a text. "Working on it. Please stay calm. Misunderstanding with local registry." Misunderstanding. Sure. Like waking up to find strangers in your bathtub is just a misunderstanding. As the sun dropped behind the mountain ridge, Mark came out to talk. "You really think you own this place?" he asked quietly. I said yes, showing him the deed again. He looked at it for a long time, then smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "Then maybe you should ask why your signature isn't the only one on it." That was the first real crack in my confidence. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing creaks upstairs and whispers through the vents. I thought maybe they were planning to leave, but in the morning, their car was gone, and so were half my boxes. My gut dropped. I'd been robbed by the people living in my house. I called the sheriff again, and he said they'd look into it. But in his tone, I could tell he thought I was losing it. When I finally sat on the porch that evening, staring at the valley below, I felt a strange mix of anger and disbelief. How could I lose control of something I legally owned? And why did I have this sinking feeling that the Garrisons weren't done with me yet? What would you have done if a family claimed your new home as theirs? Tell me in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for part 2, because this story only gets wilder from here. The sheriff's car had barely rolled out of sight when I realized the Garrisons hadn't just taken boxes. They'd taken my laptop, my wallet, and the only copy of the renovation plans. I stood in the doorway of my half-unpacked house, breathing through a mix of rage and panic. My dream of mountain quiet had turned into a slow-burning nightmare, and the walls seemed to know it. They creaked differently now, like they were whispering the family's name back to me. I spent the next few hours making lists, canceling cards, and pretending I had any control. When the realtor finally picked up my 5th call, her voice was thin, rehearsed. It's complicated, she said. There's been some confusion about ownership records. I asked her how a confusion involved people living rent-free in my home and stealing my stuff. She hung up before answering. The next day, I drove into town. Mountain View wasn't much. 2 diners, 1 gas station, and a real estate office with a cracked window that said, Miller and Sons Realty. That's where I'd sign my deal. I went inside, and the same woman, Heather, was at the desk, hair too perfect for someone supposedly working on it. When she saw me, her face twitched like she'd bitten something sour. You shouldn't be here, she whispered. I asked her if the Garrisons were her clients. She didn't deny it. They used to be, she said, voice tight. But they fell behind on payments years ago. House went into repossession. So how the hell do they still live there? I asked. She shrugged. People here don't like outsiders. Paperwork goes missing sometimes. Her phone rang then, and she answered too quickly, eyes darting away from me. I caught a glimpse of a man outside, bald, wearing a leather jacket, watching through the window before turning away. I stepped out to follow him, but he'd vanished into the alley. That night, I parked my truck near the trailhead behind the property and watched the house from a distance. Lights came on in the kitchen around 9 p.m. Someone was home again. My home. I decided to confront them, but when I got close, I realized it wasn't the Garrisons. It was 2 men I didn't recognize, hauling furniture out the back door into a moving van. My heart kicked up. I shouted, and one of them took off running. The other froze, then said, They told us they were selling. Selling? The Garrisons were trying to unload my house before I could prove it was mine. I called the sheriff again, but the dispatcher just sighed when I gave my name. Sir, maybe you should stay with friends for a while, she said. Friends. I didn't even know anyone here. By the next morning, rumors had spread around town faster than wildfire. When I walked into the diner, people went quiet. A waitress leaned in and whispered, They say you're the scammer. The Garrisons showed paperwork. I laughed, loud, ugly disbelief. Of course they did. But inside, something cracked. Maybe they really had faked everything. Maybe Heather had helped them. Or maybe the whole town was in on it. That evening, I decided to dig through the house myself. If there was truth, it had to be hiding somewhere in the dust. Upstairs, in a closet behind a loose panel, I found a stack of yellowing envelopes. Old property tax notices, all addressed to the same name, Margaret Lewis. Not Garrison. Not me. Someone entirely different. My hands shook as I opened the oldest letter. It was from 1978, talking about the land dispute with the Park family. My house had been a battleground long before I showed up. I spent the rest of the night piecing the timeline together. Margaret must have owned the place first. Then maybe her family lost it or sold it off. The Garrisons moved in later, maybe illegally, maybe through a shady deal. But somehow, the records got blurred. A perfect setup for someone like Heather to sell the same house twice. A con wrapped in mountain charm. I felt both sick and strangely thrilled. At least now I had a thread to pull. The next morning, I tried calling Heather again, but her number was disconnected. When I drove back to town, her office was empty. Furniture gone. Sign ripped down. Only a single business card left on the floor with the name, Miller and Sons Realty, crossed out in pen, and a new one written beneath. Ridge Properties, LLC. No address. Just a phone number that rang to nowhere. That night, I came home to find my front door unlocked and muddy footprints in the hall. Someone had been inside. My heart pounded as I searched the rooms. Nothing was missing this time, but on the kitchen table, there was a single note written on lined paper. You should have left when you had the chance. No signature. I locked every door, dragged a chair against the handle, and sat in the dark with a hammer in my lap, waiting for something, anything, to happen. The silence stretched until it started to hum my ears. Then, around midnight, headlights flashed through the window, stopping in the driveway. The car engine idled. A silhouette stepped out. Familiar. Confident. It was Mark Garrison. And he wasn't alone. What would you do if the people who stole your home came back in the middle of the night? Tell me in the comments below, And don't forget to like and subscribe, because the next part of the story is where everything explodes. When I saw Mark Garrison step out of that car, my first thought wasn't fear, it was fury. The man strolled up my driveway like he was walking into a barbecue. No weapon in sight, just that smug calm that only people with nothing to lose seem to carry. He stopped a few feet from the porch, hands in his pockets, and said, "You really thought we were gone for good?" The engine behind him cut off, and another figure got out, a tall woman I didn't recognize, wearing a thick coat and dark glasses even though it was nearly midnight. My grip on the hammer tightened. "You're trespassing," I said through my teeth. Mark laughed. "You keep using that word like it means something." The woman beside him spoke then, voice smooth and rehearsed. "Mr. Daniels, I'm Linda Carter, attorney for the Garrison family." She handed me a folder. Inside were documents, copies of the house deed, but with their names on it, complete with signatures, stamps, and a seal that looked painfully real. "This is a legal notice," she said. "You've been occupying this property under false pretenses. You have 72 hours to vacate before we file a claim for damages." I stared at her, then at Mark, who looked like he might burst out laughing. "You forged these," I said. "Nice try." Linda tilted her head. "Then you won't mind if we show this to the county clerk." And with that, they turned and left as calmly as they'd arrived. The sound of their car fading down the road felt like a countdown. I stayed awake till dawn, scanning the fake deed over and over, trying to find something to prove it was fake. But it was perfect. Too perfect. Whoever made it knew exactly what they were doing. By morning, I drove straight to the county records office, a squat brick building that smelled like coffee and dust. The clerk behind the counter looked half asleep until I slid both deeds across the counter. She frowned, pulled out her glasses, and compared them line by line. After 5 minutes, she looked up. "They both show as valid," she said. My stomach dropped. "That's not possible." She shrugged. "Maybe there's been a duplicate filing. Happens sometimes when records are digitized." I asked her who was responsible for digitizing the property archives. She turned the screen toward me, showing the name of the subcontractor. Ridge Properties, LLC. My pulse jumped. The same company scribbled on Heather's abandoned business card. I left the office with one thought looping in my head. Someone was running a full-blown real estate scam up here, and I was just one of many victims. I called a lawyer that afternoon, a local named Harris who specialized in property disputes. When I told him the story, he chuckled darkly. "You're not the first one, buddy. This mountain's got ghosts. Paper ghosts. Old deeds, duplicate titles, fake signatures. It's a mess." I asked if he could help me prove my claim. He nodded. "Maybe. But it'll take time and money. And these people? They play dirty." A week passed, and every day felt heavier. Mark and his family didn't show up again, but small things kept happening. My mailbox went missing one morning. The next day, tire tracks appeared across my lawn. Once, I found my front gate wide open with a note pinned to it. "Enjoying the view?" Harris advised me to install cameras. "Scammers love intimidation," he said. "If they think you'll back off, they'll double down." While checking the attic for a good camera angle, I noticed a loose floorboard near the window. Underneath, wrapped in an old newspaper, was a rusted metal box. Inside were yellowed documents, old mortgages, survey maps, and a stack of letters signed by Margaret Lewis, the woman from the tax notices I'd found earlier. The last letter was dated 1981. It mentioned a dispute over forged ownership papers and how the buyers turned out to be grifters. My hands trembled as I read it. This wasn't new. The same scam had happened 40 years ago on the same house. I took the papers to Harris, and his eyes widened. "This is gold," he said. "If we can prove the property's been used for fraud before, the state might reopen the ownership record entirely." He filed an injunction that same day, and for the first time, I felt like I wasn't drowning. But the small-town quiet didn't last. That evening, I found my truck windows smashed, and someone had spray-painted one word across the side. Thief. The next morning, I got a call from an unknown number. It was Linda, the so-called lawyer. "You're making this harder than it has to be," she said. "If you drop your claim now, we'll make sure you walk away with a refund. Keep pushing, and you'll lose more than your house." I told her to go to hell, and hung up. My hands were shaking, but my voice didn't crack. I wasn't backing down. 2 nights later, Harris called me. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "I found something." He explained that Rich Properties had filed at least 5 ownership claims in the past year, all with the same pattern: abandoned or repossessed mountain homes, duplicate deeds, fake signatures, and buyers who mysteriously vanished after filing complaints. I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. We finally had proof. But that also meant the people behind this, Mark, Heather, maybe even Linda, had been doing this for a long time. They knew how to cover tracks, and worse, how to make their victims disappear. That night, I slept with my phone recording audio on the nightstand, just in case. Around 3 a.m., I woke to the faint creak of the back door opening. I grabbed the hammer again and listened. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Moving toward the stairs. What would you do if you knew someone was in your house in the middle of the night, but calling for help might expose that you were finally onto their entire scam? Tell me in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe, because the next part will make you question who the real owner ever was. The footsteps downstairs stopped for a full minute, and in that minute, I understood what real silence was, the kind that hums against your ribs. I stood perfectly still, hammer in hand, phone still recording, every muscle locked in the dark. Then came the sound of a drawer sliding open in the kitchen, metal scraping wood. Someone was searching for something. I took a breath, stepped lightly down the stairs, and saw a flashlight beam cut through the dark. It wasn't Mark this time. It was Heather, the realtor. Her face was pale and strained, eyes darting like she was expecting someone to follow her. When she saw me, she flinched so hard the light dropped to the floor. "I told them not to go this far," she whispered. I didn't move. "What are you doing here, Heather?" She ran a hand through her hair, trembling. "You have no idea what you've stepped into. Rich Properties isn't real. It's just a name. A shell. The Garrisons, Linda, all of them, they've been using it for years to flip houses they don't own. When I got hired, I thought it was just bad bookkeeping. But then people started disappearing. Buyers. Inspectors." Her eyes flicked toward the door, like she wanted to bolt. "You need to leave this place." Before I could answer, headlights swept across the windows. Heather froze. "That's them," she whispered. "I tried to warn you." I grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the back of the house. "Who's them?" I hissed. "Mark." She shook her head. "Mark's just muscle. The real boss is Linda. And she doesn't leave witnesses." We barely made it to the cellar before we heard footsteps on the porch. 3 of them. Heavy. Confident. The back door creaked open, and voices floated in Linda's among them, calm as ever. "Heather's car's out front," she said. "Check the rooms." I held my breath as they moved through the kitchen. Heather clutched my sleeve like a child. Then one of the men stepped right above us, floorboards groaning. Heather's phone buzzed suddenly in her pocket. The vibrations sounded like thunder. I clamped my hand over it, but it was too late. A man's voice called out, downstairs. We didn't think. We ran. Out the cellar door, through the wet grass, straight into the tree line. Behind us, a flashlight beam cut through the dark like a blade. "You can't hide forever, Daniels," Linda shouted. "You signed your own confession when you bought that house." Her words echoed up the mountain. Heather tripped over a root, and I pulled her up by instinct. We didn't stop until we reached the old service road. My lungs burned like I'd swallowed fire. When we finally slowed, Heather leaned against a tree, gasping. "They've done this before," she said. "They forge deeds, move people in to make it look lived in, then resell to new buyers. They use the town's old record system to backdate everything. The sheriff's in on it too. He signs off the paperwork." I stared at her. "That's why he didn't arrest anyone." She nodded weakly. "He gets a cut." We made it to a ranger station at dawn, mud-covered and half-delirious. The ranger on duty looked skeptical until I played him the audio from my phone. The sounds of Linda's voice, the footsteps, the threat. He called it in to the state police. For the first time in weeks, I felt something that almost resembled relief. They told us to stay put, that an investigator would arrive by noon. Heather sat by the window, shaking. "They'll come after us," she said. "They always do." I didn't believe her until the explosion. It wasn't huge, but it was enough to rattle the glass and make my heart drop. Smoke rose from the direction of my property. My house, what was left of it, was burning. Linda hadn't come to scare us. She'd come to erase evidence. I wanted to run back, but the ranger stopped me. "You go there, you're next," he said flatly. We waited until the sirens came, hours later, and by then, the house was nothing but ash. The state police found traces of accelerant and tire marks leading away from the site. Heather gave her statement, shaking the whole time. "They took my recording, the documents, everything." It felt like losing the last pieces of something that had already been taken from me. The lead investigator, a woman named Perez, promised they'd look into Ridge properties. But her tone said she'd seen too many of these to promise much. A week later, Heather disappeared. No call, no message. Her motel room was empty, her car gone. Perez thought she'd run, but I wasn't so sure. I went back up to what was left of my property just to look. Among the ashes, I found the rusted metal box again, half melted but still holding one thing, the key to a safe I'd never seen before. Carved into the metal were 3 words, faint but clear. "Lewis will return." It sent a shiver through me. Margaret Lewis, the original owner. Maybe she'd hidden something that could finally expose everything. Maybe this wasn't just a scam. It was a legacy. I pocketed the key. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like running. What would you do if you found the key to the truth buried in the ashes of everything you'd lost? Tell me in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe, because the final chapter will uncover the one secret none of them wanted found. The mountain was quiet again, but not peaceful. The kind of quiet that settles after something's been buried, not healed. The air still smelled faintly of smoke from what used to be my house. I stood where the porch once was, turning that small metal key over in my hand, trying to decide whether I was chasing truth or just losing my mind. The engraving, "Lewis will return," felt like a dare. A week had passed since Heather vanished. The police stopped calling. The town pretended nothing had happened. And me? I wasn't done. I started digging into Margaret Lewis, the name that had haunted every piece of paper tied to that house. The county archives showed she'd been a property owner, yes, but also a whistleblower. Back in the early 80s, she'd reported a string of fraudulent land deals run by local developers. Every one of them connected to a company that changed names over time. Ridge Properties, Miller and Sons, Carter Development. Different fronts, same people. And the last name listed on her case file? Linda Carter. My stomach twisted. Linda hadn't just inherited the scam, she'd perfected it. The key didn't fit anything in the ruins of the house. So I went to the bank listed in the old papers, First Summit Savings, long since rebranded but still standing. I told the teller I was Margaret Lewis's grandson, faked a warm smile, and slid the key across the counter. She didn't question it. A few minutes later, she brought out a small safe deposit box, metal scuffed but intact. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were 3 things: a cassette tape, a stack of old photographs, and a ledger book filled with names, dates, and payments. At the bottom of the first page, in fading ink, was written, "They stole my home, but not my proof." I found an old tape recorder in a thrift store that same afternoon. When I pressed play, Margaret's voice came through, rough but clear. "If you're hearing this, they're still doing it," she said. "They use new names, but it's the same hands. They forged my deed, burned my house, tried to erase me, but they forgot paper has memory." Her voice broke. "If they find you, don't fight them alone." Then silence, just a low hiss of static that somehow sounded like breathing. I took the ledger and the tape to Investigator Perez. This time, she didn't look skeptical. She looked afraid. "This is enough to open a state case," she said. "You just kicked a hornet's nest that's been asleep for 40 years. Within days, warrants went out. The sheriff was arrested first, caught shredding documents in his office. Then came Linda, found trying to cross the border with cash and fake IDs. Mark and his family disappeared again, but Perez said she'd find them.
"They're small fish," she said.
The real crime was the network keeping them afloat. The news hit the local stations. Decades-long mountain property scam exposed. One headline read, "My name wasn't mentioned, and that was fine by me." I'd already lost everything that mattered except the truth. I stayed in town just long enough to testify, watching as lawyers and investors dragged each other through court, each pretending they hadn't known. The irony wasn't lost on me. The mountain house was gone, but suddenly everyone wanted to own its ashes. One morning, Perez called to say the state had cleared my name officially. I was free to rebuild. I thanked her, but didn't commit. I drove back up the mountain anyway, parked by the ridge, and sat there until sunset. The land was empty except for a few blackened boards and a single mailbox someone had left upright in the dirt. I opened it out of habit. Inside was an envelope. No stamp, no return address. Just my name scrawled in pencil. I opened it carefully, half expecting another threat. Instead, it was a photo. Margaret Lewis standing in front of the house decades ago, smiling, holding the same rusted key I now carried. On the back, written in the same faded hand, were the words, "We always come home." I don't know what she meant, rebirth, revenge, or just the cycle of the mountain taking back what's hers. But when I left that day, I didn't feel haunted anymore. Just aware. Aware that truth has roots, and sometimes you have to lose everything to find where they begin. Months later, I bought a small cabin on the other side of the ridge. Nothing fancy, just quiet. I fixed it up myself, no realtor, no paperwork beyond what I could verify in person. Some nights I'd still wake up at odd hours, thinking I heard footsteps or laughter from the old property. Maybe memory echoes in the woods longer than we expect. If you were me, would you ever buy another house after all that?
Or would you just keep driving?
Tell me down in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe because stories like this, they never really end.